I'm Dr. Isabella Rodriguez, and for 16 years, I was the chief of cardiac transplant surgery at Northpoint Medical Center in Portland, Oregon. During my career, I successfully transplanted over 520 hearts, giving patients who were literally dying a second chance at life. But I resigned 4 months ago because of 3 heart transplant cases that convinced me some memories can survive death, and some hearts carry the souls of their previous owners. Northpoint Medical Center is one of the most prestigious cardiac facilities on the West Coast. We handle the most complex cases from across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Our transplant program has a 94% 5-year survival rate, placing us in the top 3% of transplant centers nationwide. I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School in 2007, completed my cardiac surgery residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, and specialized in transplant surgery at the Cleveland Clinic. I was recruited to Northpoint in 2008 specifically to build their transplant program from the ground up. Over my 16-year career, I've performed every type of cardiac surgery imaginable. I've transplanted hearts into newborn babies whose organs were the size of walnuts. I've given 80-year-old grandparents new hearts that allowed them to dance at their grandchildren's weddings. I've worked 18-hour marathon surgeries to save patients who arrived at death's door. The human heart, in my experience, was a remarkable but ultimately mechanical organ. 4 chambers, electrical conduction system, muscular walls that contract approximately 100,000 times per day. When it fails, we replace it. Just like changing the engine in a car, the patient receives better circulation, improved quality of life, and extended longevity. What I never expected was that they might also receive fragments of another person's soul. To understand what happened in these 3 cases, you need to understand how heart transplantation actually works. The process begins when someone dies under specific circumstances, typically brain death from trauma, stroke, or aneurysm, while their heart remains viable. The donor evaluation process is exhaustive. We test for infectious diseases, cardiac function, compatibility markers, and structural abnormalities. We review the donor's medical history, lifestyle factors, and cause of death. We ensure the heart size matches the recipient's chest cavity, and that blood types are compatible. What we don't screen for is personality, memories, or what some might call the spiritual essence of the donor. The surgical procedure itself takes 4 to 6 hours. We remove the recipient's diseased heart, leaving behind small portions of the atrial walls where major vessels connect. The donor heart is carefully positioned and connected to these remaining tissues. When we restore circulation, the new heart typically begins beating within minutes. Recovery involves months of immunosuppressive medications to prevent rejection, regular biopsies to monitor for complications, and gradual return to normal activities. Most patients adapt to their new hearts without incident. In my 16 years performing these surgeries, I had 3 cases that defied everything I understood about the relationship between consciousness, memory, and the physical heart. 3 cases that convinced me we're transplanting more than just muscle tissue when we move a heart from one person to another. Our team at Northpoint consisted of the most experienced cardiac professionals in the Pacific Northwest. Dr. Amanda Foster, my anesthesiologist, had been managing transplant surgeries for over 20 years. James Liu, my lead surgical technician, could anticipate my needs before I voiced them. Maria Santos, our perfusionist who managed the heart-lung machine during surgery, was considered the best in her field. We had developed our protocols over thousands of hours of surgery. Every step was documented, every procedure refined through experience. We knew exactly how long each phase should take, which complications to watch for, and how to manage the complex logistics of coordinating donor procurement with recipient preparation. The operating room during a heart transplant is a carefully orchestrated environment. Multiple teams work simultaneously. One team prepares the recipient while another procures the donor heart. Timing is critical because the heart can only survive outside the body for a limited time. I had performed this procedure so many times that it had become almost routine. Remove the diseased heart, connect the new one, restore circulation, and wait for that magical moment when the transplanted heart begins beating in its new home. What I never anticipated was what else might begin living in that new home. The first case that would change my understanding of heart transplantation began on a rainy Thursday evening in October 2022. Rebecca Marsh, a 41-year-old elementary school librarian from Bend, Oregon, had been on our transplant waiting list for 8 months. Rebecca suffered from ischemic cardiomyopathy caused by a viral infection that had attacked her heart muscle 2 years earlier. Despite aggressive medical treatment, Her heart function had deteriorated to the point where she could barely walk across a room without becoming breathless. She was dying slowly, one heartbeat at a time. When my pager buzzed at 9:47 p.m. with news of a compatible donor heart, Rebecca was already in end-stage heart failure. We had perhaps 48 hours before her condition would become too critical for surgery. The donor was Victoria Sterling, a 29-year-old professional dancer from Seattle who had suffered a fatal brain aneurysm while performing at the Pacific Ballet Theatre. Victoria had been an organ donor, and her heart was in exceptional condition, strong, young, and perfectly sized for Rebecca. The procurement team in Seattle worked quickly to harvest Victoria's heart, while our team prepared Rebecca for surgery. By 11:30 p.m., we had both the donor heart and the recipient ready for transplantation. The surgery proceeded without complications. Rebecca's diseased heart was more damaged than our pre-surgical imaging had revealed, scarred, enlarged, and barely functional. When we removed it, I was amazed she had survived as long as she had. Victoria's heart, by contrast, was beautiful. The muscle tissue was pink and healthy, the chambers perfectly proportioned, the electrical conduction system intact. When we connected the final vessels and restored circulation, the heart began beating immediately with strong regular contractions. "Beautiful work," Dr. Foster commented as we monitored Rebecca's vital signs. Her blood pressure stabilized at normal levels for the first time in years. Her oxygen saturation climbed to 98%. The transplant was a complete success. Rebecca recovered from surgery faster than most transplant patients. Within 72 hours, she was walking the halls of the cardiac unit with energy she hadn't felt in years. Her color had returned from the grayish pallor of heart failure to healthy pink. She was scheduled for discharge after 1 week, remarkably quick for a heart transplant patient. But during her final days in the hospital, something strange began happening. Dr. Rodriguez, Rebecca said during rounds on her 6th day post-surgery, "I've been having the most vivid dreams since the operation. I'm dancing ballet, performing on stage in front of hundreds of people. The thing is, I've never danced ballet in my life. I can barely walk in high heels, much less perform pirouettes." I assured her that vivid dreams were common after major surgery, possibly related to the anesthesia or pain medications. But Rebecca's dreams became more detailed and specific over the following days. "Last night I dreamed about a studio with mirrors covering an entire wall. There was a specific bar routine, plié, tendu, grand battement. I woke up and found myself doing these movements perfectly, even though I don't know what those terms mean or how I learned them. This was concerning, but not unprecedented. Patients sometimes experience personality changes or new interests after major surgery, possibly due to the psychological impact of receiving a life-saving organ from someone who had died." But then Rebecca asked a question that sent chills down my spine. "Doctor, who was my donor? I keep having dreams about performing at the Pacific Ballet Theatre in Seattle. There's a specific performance, Giselle I think it's called, and I can remember every step, every movement, as if I had performed it myself." I maintained my professional composure, but internally I was struggling to process what she was telling me. Donor information was strictly confidential. Rebecca had no way of knowing that Victoria Sterling had been a principal dancer at the Pacific Ballet Theatre, or that her final performance had been in Giselle, just 3 hours before her fatal aneurysm. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca's transformation accelerated in ways that defied medical explanation. Her family noticed that her posture had changed. She carried herself with the grace and poise of a trained dancer. Her dietary preferences shifted dramatically. She developed cravings for specific foods she had never enjoyed before. "She's eating salmon now," her sister Jennifer told me during a family consultation. "Rebecca has been vegetarian for 15 years. She's always hated fish. But yesterday she asked me to take her to this specific seafood restaurant downtown. She ordered grilled salmon with dill sauce, exactly the way she said Victoria always ordered it." "Doctor, who is Victoria?" Rebecca keeps mentioning someone named Victoria. I was bound by medical confidentiality and could not reveal donor information, but the specificity of Rebecca's knowledge was becoming impossible to explain through conventional medical understanding. During her 3-week follow-up appointment, Rebecca demonstrated ballet positions with technical precision that would take years of training to master. She could perform complex movements, grand jetés, fouettes, arabesque turns, with the muscle memory of a professional dancer. "I don't understand what's happening to me," she confided during our appointment. "Sometimes I look in the mirror and expect to see someone else. I know things about dance technique that I've never learned. I can hear music in my head, specific pieces from ballet performances, and my body knows how to move to them. I ordered comprehensive neurological testing, psychological evaluations, and brain imaging studies. Everything came back normal. Rebecca's brain showed no abnormalities, no signs of psychological trauma, and no neurological deficits that could explain her newfound abilities and memories. Disturbed by Rebecca's case, I began researching cellular memory theory more seriously than I had ever considered before. The scientific literature contained scattered case reports of transplant recipients experiencing personality changes, new food preferences, or unusual dreams after receiving donor organs. Dr. Paul Pearsall had documented cases of heart transplant recipients who developed new artistic abilities that matched their donors' talents. Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona had studied patients who experienced detailed memories of events from their donors' lives, but the medical establishment largely dismissed these reports as anecdotal, unscientific, or explainable through conventional psychology. The heart, according to mainstream cardiology, is simply a pump. It has no capacity for memory storage or consciousness. Yet Rebecca Marsh was living proof that something more complex was happening. She had received Victoria Sterling's heart, and somehow she had also received fragments of Victoria's identity, memories and abilities. I decided to investigate further. With Rebecca's permission, I arranged for her to visit the Pacific Ballet Theatre in Seattle. I wanted to see how she would react to Victoria's former workplace, if at all. The trip to Seattle was arranged as a patient wellness excursion, officially to help Rebecca explore new interests as part of her recovery process. Unofficially, I wanted to test whether her connection to Victoria Sterling's memories was real or psychological. Rebecca had never been to the Pacific Ballet Theatre. She had never met any of Victoria's colleagues or seen the studio where Victoria had trained for over a decade. If her memories were genuine transplant-related phenomena, she should recognize people and places from Victoria's life. What happened during that visit convinced me that we were dealing with something far beyond medical science's current understanding. Rebecca walked into the theater's main rehearsal studio and immediately went to a specific corner of the room. "This is where Victoria always put her bag," she said quietly. She liked this spot because she could see the entire studio in the mirrors from here. Sarah Chen, Victoria's former dance partner, was present during our visit. She had agreed to meet with Rebecca as part of what we had described as a grief counseling session for transplant recipients. "You stand exactly like she did," Sarah observed, watching Rebecca unconsciously adopt a dancer's posture. "And your hand gestures. Victoria had this specific way of expressing herself when she talked. You're doing the same movements." But the most unsettling moment came when the theater's music director Michael Thompson began playing the opening notes of Giselle, the ballet Victoria had performed on the night she died. Rebecca's body responded immediately, moving into the opening position of the lead role with perfect technical precision. She began performing Victoria's choreography flawlessly, including subtle personal interpretations that Victoria had developed over years of performing the piece. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Those aren't the standard Giselle movements. Those are Victoria's personal variations. She spent months perfecting those specific turns, that particular arm positioning. How could you possibly know them?" Rebecca stopped dancing abruptly, looking around the studio with confusion and fear. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely audible. "I can feel someone else inside me, moving my body, remembering things I never learned." The drive back to Portland was silent. Rebecca stared out the window, lost in thoughts that seemed to belong to someone else. I was grappling with the implications of what we had witnessed. If Rebecca truly possessed Victoria's memories, what did that mean for our understanding of consciousness? Was the heart somehow involved in memory storage? Was there a biological mechanism that allowed one person's experiences to transfer to another through organ transplantation? Back at Northpoint, I began documenting every detail of Rebecca's case. I interviewed her family about personality changes, recorded her demonstrations of ballet technique, and compiled a comprehensive timeline of her transformation. The more I investigated, the more convinced I became that we were witnessing something unprecedented in medical science. Rebecca hadn't simply received a new heart, she had received fragments of Victoria Sterling's identity. When I presented Rebecca's case to my colleagues during our monthly department meeting, the reaction was predictably skeptical. "Isabella, you're describing cellular memory theory," Dr. William Hayes, our chief of cardiology, said dismissively. "That's been debunked repeatedly. There's no biological mechanism for organs to store memories." "Then how do you explain Rebecca's knowledge of Victoria's choreography?" "She performed movements that Victoria had created herself, variations that weren't taught in any dance school." Coincidence? Unconscious observation? Psychological suggestion? There are dozens of rational explanations that don't require us to believe in mystical organ transplantation, but I had witnessed the transformation myself. I had seen Rebecca move with Victoria's grace, demonstrate Victoria's technique, and express Victoria's artistic sensibilities. This wasn't coincidence or suggestion. This was direct transfer of learned behaviors and memories. Dr. Foster, my anesthesiologist, was more open to alternative explanations. Isabella, I've been in the OR for over 2 decades, and I've seen some unexplainable things. Maybe we don't understand everything about consciousness and how it relates to the body. The heart is just a pump, Amanda, Dr. Hayes insisted. It doesn't think, it doesn't remember, it doesn't carry someone's personality. We're scientists, not mystics. But science, I was beginning to realize, might be missing something fundamental about the nature of human consciousness and its relationship to physical organs. Over the following months, Rebecca's transformation continued to evolve in ways that challenged every assumption I had about transplant surgery. She enrolled in advanced ballet classes at a local dance studio, where her instructors were amazed by her rapid progress. She learns choreography faster than students who've been dancing for years. Her instructor, Patricia Williams, told me when I called to check on Rebecca's adaptation. It's like the movements are already stored in her muscle memory. She just needs to access them. Rebecca's family struggled to adapt to the changes in their loved one. Her husband, David, found himself living with someone who was simultaneously his wife and a stranger. She remembers our anniversary, our first date, the day we bought our house, he told me during a family counseling session, but she also remembers performing in dance competitions that happened before we met, in cities she's never visited. She knows the names of Victoria's dance instructors from childhood, people she couldn't possibly have met. Most disturbing was Rebecca's growing obsession with Victoria's life. She began researching her donor's background, seeking out Victoria's friends and family, trying to piece together memories that felt like her own. I feel guilty being alive when Victoria isn't, Rebecca confessed during one of our appointments. Her memories feel so real, so present. Sometimes I forget which life is actually mine. I ordered every test available to understand what was happening to Rebecca. Brain MRIs, psychological evaluations, neurological assessments, even experimental studies measuring electrical activity in both her brain and transplanted heart. The results were consistently normal. Rebecca's brain showed no abnormalities that could explain her access to Victoria's memories. Her psychological evaluations indicated excellent mental health and no signs of delusional thinking. Neurologically, she was completely healthy. But when we monitored the electrical activity of her transplanted heart, we discovered something unusual. The heart's rhythm patterns occasionally matched documented recordings of Victoria Sterling's cardiac rhythms from her pre-mortem medical records. Dr. Elena Martinez, our chief of cardiology, was baffled by these findings. The heart has its own electrical system, independent of the brain, she explained. But electrical patterns are typically unique to each individual, like fingerprints. Rebecca's heart is occasionally beating with Victoria's rhythm patterns, which should be impossible. We expanded our testing to include experimental measures of electromagnetic fields around Rebecca's heart. Some researchers theorize that the heart generates its own electromagnetic signature that might somehow encode information. The results were inconclusive but intriguing. Rebecca's heart generated electromagnetic patterns that were more complex than typical post-transplant patients. Whether this had any relationship to her memory experiences was impossible to determine with current technology. 6 months after her transplant, Rebecca requested a meeting with Victoria Sterling's family. This was highly unusual. Donor families and recipients typically don't have direct contact, especially not at the recipient's initiative based on claimed memories. But Rebecca's case was so unique that the hospital's ethics committee approved the meeting under controlled circumstances. Victoria's parents, Robert and Linda Sterling, agreed to participate. The meeting was arranged in a neutral conference room at Northpoint, with a grief counselor present and strict guidelines about what information could be shared. What happened during that meeting still gives me chills. Rebecca walked into the room and immediately approached Linda Sterling. "You're Victoria's mother," she said with certainty. "Victoria always said you had the most beautiful hands, perfect for playing piano." Linda Sterling's face went white. Victoria had indeed frequently commented on her mother's hands, a family joke about Linda's abandoned piano lessons from childhood. This wasn't information that appeared in any donor records or public obituaries. "You smell like the lavender perfume Victoria gave you for your birthday last year," Rebecca continued. "She was so proud of finding the exact scent you wore when she was little." Robert Sterling stood up abruptly. "This is impossible. How could you know these things?" Victoria never spoke publicly about family details like that. Rebecca sat down across from Victoria's parents, and for the next hour she shared memories that could only have belonged to their daughter. She described family vacations in detail, recalled conversations between Victoria and her parents, and knew intimate details about Victoria's childhood fears and dreams. Victoria was afraid of thunderstorms until she was 12, Rebecca said softly. She used to hide in the closet during storms until you built her that blanket fort in the living room. She called it her Thunder Castle. Linda Sterling began crying. The Thunder Castle was something Victoria had never shared with anyone outside the immediate family, a private comfort during childhood that had never been documented or discussed publicly. As the meeting continued, Victoria's parents shared their own disturbing experiences since their daughter's death. They had been experiencing what they described as visitations, moments when they felt Victoria's presence, heard her voice, or sensed her trying to communicate with them. "We thought we were just grieving," Robert Sterling explained, "but there were times when Linda would find dance shoes moved in Victoria's old room, or we'd hear her favorite music playing when no one had turned on the stereo." Most significantly, Linda Sterling reported having dreams where Victoria appeared to her, saying she was living in someone else now, and asking her parents to find the librarian with my heart. These dreams had begun approximately 3 weeks after Victoria's death, exactly when Rebecca started experiencing her first ballet dreams. "Victoria told me in the dream that she was okay, but confused," Linda continued. "She said she could see through someone else's eyes but couldn't control what was happening. She wanted us to know she was still here, just different." The implications were staggering. If Linda Sterling's dreams were accurate, Victoria's consciousness had somehow survived her brain death and was experiencing life through Rebecca's eyes. Following the meeting with Victoria's family, Rebecca's condition became even more complex. She began exhibiting what could only be described as dual consciousness, periods when she was clearly Rebecca Marsh, and periods when Victoria Sterling's personality seemed to emerge. During Victoria periods, Rebecca's voice would change subtly, adopting speech patterns and mannerisms that matched video recordings of Victoria Sterling. She would reference people and events from Victoria's life, as if she had experienced them personally. "I miss performing," Rebecca said during one of these episodes. "The lights, the audience, the feeling of perfect synchronization with the music. My body remembers every role I ever danced." When I reminded her that she was Rebecca, not Victoria, she would look confused and disoriented. "I know I'm Rebecca," she would say, "but Victoria's memories feel like they're happening to me right now. I can remember her childhood as clearly as my own." Rebecca's husband David struggled to cope with these personality shifts. "Sometimes I'm talking to my wife, and sometimes I'm talking to a 29-year-old dancer who died before we met," he told me. "I love Rebecca, but I don't know how to live with someone who's become two different people." Word of Rebecca's case began circulating among transplant surgeons across the country. Some colleagues expressed interest in studying the phenomenon further. Others dismissed it as a psychological reaction to major surgery, or suggested that Rebecca was experiencing some form of post-traumatic stress. Dr. Richard Chen from Johns Hopkins called me to discuss similar cases he had witnessed. "Isabella, I've had 3 heart transplant patients over the past decade who exhibited personality changes that seemed to match their donors' characteristics. The medical establishment doesn't want to acknowledge these cases because they challenge too many fundamental assumptions, but for every colleague who showed interest, 2 others questioned my professional judgment." Hospital administration began receiving complaints from other physicians who felt I was promoting unscientific theories that could damage the hospital's reputation. Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Patricia Hayes, our chief of staff, said during a private meeting, "You're one of our most respected surgeons, but your recent focus on this cellular memory theory is causing concern. We need to maintain scientific credibility in our transplant program." Despite institutional pressure, I continued documenting Rebecca's case and researching similar phenomena. I discovered that cellular memory experiences in transplant recipients were more common than the medical literature suggested, but most cases were either not reported or were dismissed by physicians who didn't want to acknowledge unexplainable phenomena. Dr. Claire Sylvia, who had received a heart-lung transplant in 1988, had written about experiencing her donor's food cravings and personality traits. William Sheridan, a heart transplant recipient, had developed artistic abilities that matched his donor's talents. Dozens of other cases existed in medical records, typically buried in notes about unusual psychological reactions to surgery. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that we were transplanting more than just hearts. We were transferring some essential component of human consciousness along with the physical organ. This possibility raised profound questions about the nature of identity, consciousness, and what happens to the human soul when the body dies. If Victoria Sterling's memories and personality could survive her brain death and transfer to Rebecca through her transplanted heart, what did that say about our understanding of life and death? A year after her transplant, Rebecca had found a way to integrate both aspects of her new dual existence. She returned to work as a librarian, but also began teaching ballet to children at a local dance studio. She had developed a unique teaching style that combined her natural patience as an educator with Victoria's technical expertise as a professional dancer. "I've accepted that I'm both Rebecca and Victoria now," she told me during her annual follow-up appointment. "I have two sets of memories, two different skill sets, two ways of seeing the world. It's strange, but it's also beautiful in a way. Victoria gets to continue dancing through me." Her relationship with David had stabilized after couples counseling helped them navigate the complexities of loving someone who had become, in essence, two different people. "I married Rebecca, and she's still here," David explained. "But now she comes with this amazing gift from someone who wanted to keep dancing even after death." Rebecca also maintained contact with Victoria's family, serving as a bridge between them and their deceased daughter. "It brings them comfort to know that part of Victoria lives on," Rebecca said, "and it helps me understand these memories that feel so real." But Rebecca's case was just the beginning. As word spread about her remarkable transformation, I began receiving calls from other transplant centers describing similar phenomena. Colleagues shared stories they had previously kept quiet about recipients who seemed to inherit aspects of their donors' personalities. Most disturbing was the consistency of these reports. Heart transplant recipients appeared to be most susceptible to cellular memory phenomena, more so than recipients of other organs. Something about the heart seemed particularly capable of carrying forward the essence of its original owner. I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about the heart's role in human consciousness. Was it possible that the heart was more than just a circulatory organ? Could it serve as a storage device for memories, emotions, or even aspects of the soul? My fascination with Rebecca's case began affecting my approach to all transplant surgeries. I started paying more attention to the psychological adaptation of recipients, looking for signs of personality changes or unusual memory experiences. I began keeping detailed notes about donors' backgrounds, personalities, and life experiences, wondering if I could predict which recipients might experience cellular memory phenomena based on the characteristics of their donor hearts. My colleagues noticed the change in my behavior. "Isabella, you're spending too much time on psychological aspects of recovery," Dr. Hayes warned me. "Your job is to perform successful surgeries, not to investigate metaphysical theories about consciousness transfer." But I couldn't ignore what I had witnessed with Rebecca. If consciousness could somehow survive in transplanted hearts, the implications for medicine, philosophy, and our understanding of human nature were enormous. Rebecca Marsh continues to live with Victoria Sterling's heart, carrying forward the memories and abilities of a dancer who died too young. Her case taught me that heart transplantation might involve more than the transfer of muscle tissue and electrical conduction systems. We might be transplanting souls, but Rebecca's case was just the first crack in my understanding of the boundary between life and death, identity and physicality, science and mystery. What happened with my next two transplant patients would convince me that some hearts carry secrets too dark to bear, and some memories are better left buried with their original owners. The dance of life and death had just begun, and I was about to learn that not all transplanted memories are as beautiful as ballet. Some hearts remember how they died, and some hearts remember who killed them.
8 months after Rebecca's successful transplant, I encountered a case that would make her beautiful dance memories seem like a blessing. Thomas Brennan, a 52-year-old high school history teacher from Salem, Oregon, arrived at Northpoint Medical Center in critical condition after suffering his third massive heart attack. Thomas had been fighting coronary artery disease for over a decade. His heart muscle was severely damaged, functioning at barely 20% capacity. Without a transplant, he had days to live. On January 18, 2024, we received word of a compatible donor heart from Marcus Webb, a 34-year-old construction foreman who had died in what police classified as a workplace accident at a downtown Portland building site. Marcus had fallen from the 12th floor of an unfinished office complex. The heart was in excellent condition despite the traumatic cause of death. The transplant surgery went flawlessly. Thomas's recovery was remarkably smooth, better than most patients his age. His new heart began pumping with the strength of a man 20 years younger. Within a week, Thomas was walking the hospital corridors with energy he hadn't felt in years. But on his 5th day post-surgery, Thomas experienced something that would haunt me for the rest of my medical career. He woke up screaming. I remember falling. I remember the exact moment when I realized I was going to die. But it wasn't an accident. Thomas was drenched in sweat, his vital signs showing extreme stress despite his stable cardiac function. He described a vivid dream where he was standing on the 12th floor of a construction site, arguing with 2 men in hard hats. They were angry about something. Money, a contract dispute. One of them, a tall guy with a scar on his left hand, kept saying I knew too much. Then they pushed me. I tried to reassure Thomas that trauma-related dreams were common after major surgery, but his descriptions were becoming disturbingly specific. He could describe the layout of the construction site in detail, knew the names of Marcus Webb's co-workers, and recounted conversations he claimed to remember from Marcus's final day. Most chilling was his insistence that Marcus Webb hadn't fallen accidentally. Thomas claimed to remember being murdered. Against my better medical judgment, I contacted Detective Sarah Mitchell at Portland Police Department. Marcus Webb's death had been investigated as a workplace accident, but no thorough homicide investigation had been conducted. Dr. Rodriguez, we get these calls occasionally from family members who can't accept accidental deaths, Detective Mitchell explained. But you're telling me a heart transplant patient is claiming to remember being murdered? Marcus Webb had been scheduled to testify in a federal investigation about construction contract fraud involving his employer, Cascade Construction. Several workers had reported safety violations and financial irregularities that could have resulted in major criminal charges. The 2 workers Thomas described, including the man with a scar on his left hand, were real people. Jake Morrison and Pete Daniels had been on duty the day Marcus died and had given statements claiming they witnessed him slip and fall. But Thomas knew details about these men that weren't in any public records. He knew Jake Morrison's nickname among the crew, Pete Daniels' gambling problems, and specific conversations about the federal investigation that only someone present could have known. The specificity of Thomas's knowledge convinced Detective Mitchell to reopen the investigation. When confronted with Thomas's statements, Jake Morrison broke down and confessed. He and Pete Daniels had indeed pushed Marcus Webb to prevent him from testifying in the federal case. Marcus Webb's death was reclassified as homicide. 2 men were arrested for murder based on memories recovered from a heart transplant recipient. But solving Marcus's murder didn't end Thomas's nightmare. If anything, it made his condition worse. The case that finally broke me occurred just 3 months later. Emma Carter was only 8 years old when she arrived at Northpoint Medical Center, with end-stage heart failure caused by a rare genetic cardiomyopathy. Emma was the youngest patient I had ever considered for heart transplantation. Her tiny body was failing rapidly, and without a new heart she would not live to see her 9th birthday. On March 25, 2024, a compatible pediatric donor heart became available from Sophie Mitchell, a 7-year-old girl who had died in what was reported as a drowning accident at Laurelhurst Park. The heart was perfectly sized for Emma and showed no structural abnormalities. But 2 weeks after surgery, Emma began having what her parents described as scary dreams about drowning. 8-year-old Emma Carter began describing dreams where she was playing by a lake, then struggling underwater while someone held her down. Unlike adult patients who might rationalize unusual dreams, Emma spoke about these experiences with the matter-of-fact honesty of a child. The lady pushed me under the water and wouldn't let me come up, Emma told her mother, Lisa Carter. She said I was a bad girl for seeing what I saw, but I didn't know what she meant. Lisa Carter brought Emma's statements to my attention during a routine follow-up appointment. As a physician, I was obligated to report suspected child abuse, but how do you report a murder based on memories from a transplanted heart? I contacted Detective Mitchell again, who had become my unofficial liaison for transplant-related criminal investigations. She was initially skeptical about pursuing a case based on an 8-year-old's dreams, but Emma's specific knowledge about the drowning scene convinced her to review Sophie Mitchell's death. The original investigation had concluded that Sophie had wandered away from her family's picnic and accidentally fallen into the lake. Her body was found by park maintenance workers the following morning. No foul play was suspected, but when Detective Mitchell interviewed witnesses again, inconsistencies emerged in the timeline. Several people remembered seeing a woman with red hair near the lake around the time Sophie disappeared, but this person had never been identified or questioned. Emma's memories became more detailed over the following weeks. She described the red-haired woman as someone Sophie knew and trusted, someone who had approached her while she was playing alone by the water. Sophie thought the lady wanted to play a game, Emma told me during one of our sessions, but when they went to the lake, the lady got angry and said Sophie had seen her doing something bad with money that wasn't hers. Emma's description led investigators to Jennifer Walsh, a family friend who worked as a bookkeeper for Sophie's father's construction business.
Jennifer had red hair and had been present at the family picnic where Sophie died. Further investigation revealed that Jennifer had been embezzling money from the construction company for over 2 years. Sophie, playing in her father's office the week before her death, had witnessed Jennifer altering financial records. When confronted with Emma's detailed memories of the drowning, Jennifer Walsh confessed she had followed Sophie to the lake, panicked when the child mentioned the numbers game she had seen Jennifer playing on her father's computer, and held Sophie underwater until she drowned. A 7-year-old girl had been murdered to cover up embezzlement, and the only witness was the heart that remembered her final moments. Jennifer Walsh was arrested for Sophie Mitchell's murder, the second homicide solved through memories recovered from transplanted hearts under my care. But this case involving a child pushed me beyond my psychological breaking point. I could no longer perform heart transplant surgeries knowing that recipients might experience the donor's memories of their death. Rebecca's beautiful ballet memories had been a gift, but Thomas's murder and Emma's drowning were traumatic burdens that no one should have to bear. How could I continue transplanting hearts when I knew they might carry the darkness of violent death? How could I condemn recipients to relive their donors' final moments of terror and pain? The psychological impact on both Thomas and Emma was severe. Thomas required extensive therapy to cope with experiencing Marcus Webb's murder. Emma, despite her young age, was haunted by memories of drowning that belonged to another child. On June 15, 2024, I submitted my resignation to the Chief of Staff at Northpoint Medical Center. I could no longer practice transplant surgery with the knowledge that hearts carry more than blood. They carry souls, memories, and sometimes the trauma of violent death. Dr. Rodriguez, you've saved hundreds of lives. Dr. Hayes pleaded during our final meeting. You can't let 3 unusual cases end your career. But I had seen enough. Hearts remember everything. The joy of dancing, the fear of falling, the panic of drowning. When we transplant hearts, we're not just giving patients a second chance at life. We're potentially condemning them to relive someone else's death. The medical establishment preferred to classify these cases as coincidental or psychological, but I had witnessed the truth. Consciousness doesn't end with brain death. Some essential part of who we are survives in our hearts, waiting to be awakened in a new body. I now work as a family physician in a small town in rural Montana, treating common illnesses and avoiding any procedures involving life and death decisions. But the 3 cases from Northpoint Medical Center continue to haunt me. Rebecca Marsh still dances with Victoria Sterling's memories, finding beauty in her dual existence. Thomas Brennan struggles with the trauma of experiencing Marcus Webb's murder. 8-year-old Emma Carter is growing up with another child's memories of drowning. All 3 solved crimes that would have remained hidden forever. All 3 proved that death is not the end of consciousness. All 3 convinced me that some medical mysteries are too profound for current science to explain. The heart that beats in your chest is more than a pump. It's a repository of memory, emotion, and experience. When someone dies and their heart continues beating in another body, they don't simply disappear. They live on in ways we're only beginning to understand. I've transplanted over 500 hearts, but these 3 cases taught me that we're playing with forces beyond our comprehension. We're not just moving organs between bodies, we're transferring souls between the living and the dead. Some hearts remember love, some remember fear, and some remember the exact moment when life became death. The question that haunts me is this: if hearts can remember the past, what else might they know about the future? The dead don't always stay silent. Sometimes they speak through the hearts that continue beating long after their last breath, and sometimes they demand justice from beyond the grave.